This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast.
Our brains are imprinted and programmed by our surroundings. What we know is normal may be seen as insanity to others. Until we have something else, different is a concept that cannot be grasped. Those who are oppressed do not know they're oppressed until they see an alternative. Once that moment is realized, it is impossible to unring that bell. Your eyes open and the world suddenly becomes that much bigger. One of the beauties of the human experience is that we have the freedom to express our individuality. The majority of the world takes this gift for granted. While it is true that we herd up, we must be cautious of what tribe we choose. I'm Kevin Donaldson, always here with Mike Felice, and welcome to the Suffering Podcast. If you're a fan of overcoming adversity and overcoming suffering, then we're for you, because that's what we do here, and that's the stories that we highlight. So do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, please comment, ring the bell so you can get notified of all of our new content. Now you can join. And of course, follow us on all social media. That way you can find out exactly what we're up to. On this episode of the Suffering Podcast, we welcome Chasya, a new friend, to talk about the suffering of cults. Chasya is going to tell you a story about her past, and it's amazing because I've heard it. I've heard parts of it. We're going to put a little different spin on it tonight. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we get into anything, because I don't want to get involved too deep into a conversation before I give a big shout out to our marquee sponsor. That's Toyota of Hackensack. We don't trust anybody as retired police, and we certainly don't trust anybody as podcasters, but we do trust Toyota of Hackensack. So if you're looking for a car, go to toyotahackensack.com and let them find you a car. So, Chasya, every week we take a question from our audience. This question comes from Snoogans, and I'm a big Jay and Silent Bob guy, so I picked this one out for that. But it's a great question. When does somebody deserve your gratitude? You know, we're all tied up in this world and being mad at this person for this and mad at this person for that, but eventually you have to give gratitude to somebody in your life. So when does somebody deserve that in your life?
The word deserve is where that's where I hiccup. I think that to be a gracious human being and to have gratitude in life is always going to be a more powerful way of being versus being resentful and being full of self-pity. If you have gratitude, you count your blessings and you realize that life isn't that bad. But when it comes to human beings, I mean, when somebody does something nice for you, when people are altruistic, the simple things, when people open a door for you, when people have manners. I mean, I'm a very gracious person, so I give my gratitude, you know, if they, do something kind, do the right thing, and sometimes even if they don't.
I thought you were going to get to this because I don't like the word deserve.
Right.
Okay, that word deserve kind of turns my stomach. Nothing is deserved in this world, in this life. Nothing is deserved. Everything is earned. Okay, you don't deserve to have a fancy house up on the hill or $1 million car, or nobody deserves. You earn it, because when something is, you feel that you deserved, you're almost like a victim. I deserve this because I'm living and breathing. No, you earn this. And when you earn something, you become much more grateful, right? So
Absolutely.
So for me, gratitude, I give my gratitude a lot more freely than I used to when I was younger. I used to give my gratitude when somebody did something kind for me. Hell, thank you very much. And I'm a please and thank you type of person. I used to give my gratitude only when something was given to me freely or given to me with good intentions. Ever since my shooting, my gratitude and the giving of my gratitude has changed drastically. I give gratitude for those people who don't treat me well, who treat me poorly. You want to know why? Because I learn more from them. I don't really learn anything, and I am grateful for somebody holding the door for me or something like that. I am. I don't want to minimize that, but I become more grateful for the person who slams the door in my face because they just taught me something about themselves. So I'm grateful for that lesson that they just gave me. So My gratitude, I flipped it on its ear, and my gratitude is given more freely to people who don't treat me right, who don't do the right thing, because they teach me something. They teach me that there are people in the world that may not deserve gratitude, but those are the people that I give gratitude to.
That's very deep and a very high level that you're on.
Took a long time to get here. It took 50 years to get here. So I'm grateful that I even made it to 50. But it was a lot. It was a lot of hard work. So Snoogans, thank you so much for sending that question in. Keep sending in your questions, and we will try to get them on the air. And while you're at it, go over and see Gus, 234 Franklin Avenue at Cubita Cafe. Gus is not in the food business. He's in the people business. And if you go there once, you're going to understand it, because when you go in there, you're going to be treated like family, but you're also going to have a fantastic meal by a classically trained chef. So go to 234 Franklin Avenue in Nutley, New Jersey. Go see Gus at Cubita Cafe, and he's going to treat you right. So Chasya, I've seen you on several different shows. I've seen you on Soft White Underbelly. It's nice to have a fellow alumni in the studio. I've seen you on Clark Frederick's podcast. Clark is, family member in here. And I'm overly grateful for you, because I know your story, and it's a subject that we haven't really touched on, because we try to stay away from two things in here. We try to stay away from politics, and we try to stay away from religion. But unfortunately, religion in itself is a good thing, but religion can be bastardized. So how you grew up is of great interest to me. So why don't you give our audience a little bit about yourself and tell us how you grew up?
I was born in California, which I wish we stayed, but unfortunately my mom called it Sodom and Gomorrah. So
I might have to agree with your mother on this one, because I was just there.
I mean, she's not wrong, but there's also great parts of California.
Yes,
and you can't generalize an entire humongous state. So she wasn't happy there. And my father, being a rabbi, he got a job out there, and my mom was very, very unhappy there, because God forbid, she sees disrobed women, and to her that's just unacceptable. And we moved. My parents are both from New York, and my dad grew up in the Lower East Side, and my mom is from the Bronx. And we moved to Brooklyn, Flatbush.
Now, what sect of Judaism are we talking about? Are we talking about Orthodox, Reformed, Hasidic? What are we looking at?
So there's like a whole spectrum in my family. We have modern Orthodox. We even have a cousin of mine married a non-Jew, and she converted. They live out in Texas. And then we have family that, lives in the Middle East, super normal. Normal means...
I understand what you're saying.
They have the spirituality, but they also follow tradition, but they're not going to freak out if you get in a car on the Sabbath. You know what I mean?
They take a step into the modern world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's this beautiful balance.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not judgmental. And then you have the other side of the spectrum, where there's ultra orthodoxy and Hasidic. And my dad, he is what you call... He wasn't born into the radical extremist Judaism. What happened was, I don't know what exactly happened, but a lot of people in our culture go to Israel. It's like this badge of honor. I know there's so much going on there, so I feel bad bringing it up.
Israel's been a hotbed for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. This is just the latest chapter in their hardships.
And I feel like I do have to say that I feel extremely awful and sad for the innocent people that are being completely decimated. And I feel for the other side, as well as, when I went to Israel, I got to see how terrifying it can be. I witnessed.
See, the thing that hurts me about that is Israel is one of those places. It's like on my bucket list of places I want to go.
You should. It's
All right?
beautiful.
And while I am religious, while I am a Christian, there's history there, and I'm all about history. I mean, there's the Western Wall, there's the Temple Mount, there's there's all these things that you've only read about, and you get to see them with your own two eyes. Now, I'm going to tell people this, and people aren't going to believe me. You can read all day long about something, but when you are actually there, seeing it with your own eyes and putting your hand out and touching something, there's a different connection. So that's the beauty of Israel. And aside from the religious connotations that Israel has, it's a country that's rich in history, rich in tradition of all different walks of life.
It's the land of milk and honey.
Yep.
When I tell you the peaches are the size of grapefruits, everything there, the food is better. The girls are freaking gorgeous.
Tel Aviv, I've seen pictures of Tel Aviv.
Oh my goodness, you go on the beach in Netanyahu and it's like, oh my God.
So I remember that during the first Gulf War, where they had a camera crew out in Tel Aviv because Tel Aviv was getting bombed, and they were showing pictures of the beaches, and I'm like, where the hell is this? I gotta take a little vacation. I was unmarried at the time. I was like, I gotta take a little vacation out here.
You could take wifey now and still have fun, you know?
Yeah, but there's too many girls in Tel Aviv. No, I'm just kidding you. My wife, I don't know whether my wife would appreciate Israel in much the same respects that I do. You know, I'm a little older, I'm a little wiser, and I would be there like it would be a pilgrimage for me. It would be an absolute pilgrimage for me. But so do you think that your father may have gotten radicalized there?
Exactly. Let's back up. So when my father went to Israel, he went to a extremely, extremely religious, it's called the yeshiva. And he graduated the top of his class, honors. He was going to be the next leader. You know, he was such a top tier scholar that a man, my aunt, his sister told me this. He never told this to me, but his sister told me, my favorite Aunt Debbie, she told me that someone offered my father 50,000 shekel to go on a date with his daughter. And my father was so holy and so devout. He said, I have to, unfortunately, not accept your offer because I don't want your daughter to think that I'm going on this date with her for the money. And he declined the date.
Is that woman still available? Because I could use 50,000 shekels. Every religion. Think about all the bad things that have been done in the name of religion. Every religion. And I'm not taking a crap on Judaism, and I don't crap on any religion, but there are certain sects within every religion, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, that are radicalized. And they get this in their head that I'm right, you're wrong, and that's just the way that it is. And it couldn't be further from the truth. There's many different areas of gray. It's never just black and white.
Never.
Yeah. So he brought that radicalism back to the States.
He also got so much respect. He got so much, everybody just always bowed to him, knowing that he would be this top tier scholar. And I can't think anybody would want to give that up.
Well, you get drunk on power. You get drunk on that power a little bit. You know, if you're a person of any type of power, it goes to your head. It's the Elvis syndrome. And you know, listen, I got Elvis sitting right there. He's one of my favorites. If all day long you're having people tell you you're great, you're great, you're great, you're great, it's going to get into your head, and eventually you may even believe it.
Definitely. I mean, we do not sit in his chair. Till this day, if I am kind of an outcast now, but if I brought a friend over and they didn't know it was my father's chair, my mother would snap and be like, you're sitting in the head of the household's chair, get up and move. And I'd be like dying of embarrassment. He's treated like a king. He's fed first. He has his chair. I remember my mom cooking 3 dinners, a dinner for his palate, her dinner, and the kids' dinner. Like,
that sounds exhausting.
Oh my gosh. My mom, I don't know how she did it, because being a very parentified child, I mean, the Sabbath starts Friday night and it goes to Saturday night. And my mother wouldn't let me leave the house from Thursday until Sunday morning. I had to I'm one of 8 kids, and I would have to prepare because there would be 8 kids plus the parents, and my grandparents lived in the basement. So it was a huge, huge family. And my dad would say the reason why he wouldn't like to have guests was because he's so religious that he would be afraid that the guests would speak evil about others, which is a sin. It's called lashon hara in Hebrew, which is speaking badly about others, which is a big sin in our religion. And he was so religious that he didn't even want to have guests over because he would be afraid that at a Sabbath table, sin would occur.
I have a very good friend of mine who is a rabbi, and he was raised Hasidic, and he grew up in New Lots. So he sort of schooled me. Like, he was telling me a story that ultra religious Jewish people will actually hire Gentiles to turn the lights on and off.
Absolutely. It's called Shabbos goy. Do you know what a goy means?
Yeah.
It's a very derogatory term, but the actual meaning of it, goy means really from the other nations. It does have a derogatory connotation to it, but goyim means other nations.
I've heard goyim. Quite a bit. I think we should bring that back, and we should reclaim that. Goyim.
Hell yeah.
I'll say goyim, please. How about that? We'll start taking that one back.
There's goy, there's shiksa, there's shagets.
My little shiksa. Okay, so Jerry Lewis, Jewish, married a Gentile, and his production company, and anybody who wants to check this out, his production company's name was My Little Shiksa.
I love it.
And how do I remember that? I can't remember people's birthdays, but I can remember Jerry Lewis's production company. Figure that one out. So he got radicalized before you were born. Is that correct? All right. So you were born into this, and you knew nothing else. Like, this is normal to you. Tell me some of the things that you had to do as a young lady.
First and foremost, at the age of 3, we already have to wear. We have to cover our wrists, our collarbone. These 2 bones right here have to be covered.
They don't want anybody to get sexually aroused. Correct?
Right from these sexy collarbone right here. You have to have the knees covered, and then as you get older, your ankles have to be covered. So when I turned 3, that was the last of me being able to wear, the pretty frilly socks. And I would have to wear high up socks so that my legs weren't exposed at 3. Which, if we think about it, it's like, why are we looking at a 3-year-old and objectifying them and already making them think that at 3 we have to cover up like that?
There is every deviation in every walk of life that you could possibly imagine. There is child predators in every neighborhood, in every religion, in every job. They're just out there.
But it's what you wear. It's not going to stop a predator.
This is 100% true.
Because I don't like. That's something my mom would challenge me with. She was a victim blamer and a victim shamer. If somebody acted in a way that was inappropriate, she would say to me, well, what were you wearing? Instead of, who's this person? Let's get their name down and let's report them. She never saw it as, we have freedom of choice. You can't act like an animal. If you go to court and somebody violates you, the judge's not going to say, what were you wearing to make him do that? That person has freedom of choice, and he's not an animal, and he decides what he's going to do.
Well, that carries over in both areas, because when I was in school, and back then teachers could hit you, and when they hit you, it wasn't don't hit my kid, it was what did you do? You understand, where no kid should be hit by a teacher, but there's some good to that and there's some bad to that, because with the hitting portion, sexuality aside. So if I'm screwing around, I got punished for it. So, and we've kind of swung so far the other way these days that doesn't happen. It's always take the kid's word first, when sometimes the kid can be a little shit. So
actually, in the Hasidic community, in the boys' school, the teachers are still allowed to hit the boys.
Yeah, it never works. Because you know why?
No, it doesn't.
When I got hit, I'd be like, oh, if you're going to hit me, I'm going to do something.
So when I got beaten, I definitely didn't do something. I succumbed to the victim mentality. Violence, I'm such a gentle person, and getting beat, it ripped my soul apart.
I always figure, so it does to a certain age. It did to a certain age with me as well. But it got to a point where I'm like, if you're going to do this anyway, well, I might as well deserve it. You know, I might as well do something to warrant this because I'm getting it anyway. So I might as well act out. And there's two ways you can go. There's certain people that will curl up and just accept it. I'm just not that person.
I was fear-based, you know. It was terrifying. I remember my mom saying, I'm going to start counting, and if you don't turn over, whatever number I get up to is the amount of beatings you're going to get. So it was like you had to offer up your ass to my mom.
Your bare ass?
Well,
because that hurts.
And I'm so happy you brought that up, because imagine, a lot of people may not agree with this, but imagine I walked up to you, yanked down your pants, and threw you over me and started smacking your bare ass.
Some people pay good money for that.
I know, but that's actually a crime.
Yes, it is.
And I don't understand the idea of exposing a child's privates to beat them. Because if we did that to adults, it's
a humiliation thing.
Yeah, I think in a way it's I don't want to be extreme, but it is a violation of the child. You can hit with the pants over, but usually she didn't. But the one time that she did, I'll never forget it, because I already had said this story where when we lived in Brooklyn, we lived in a 2-family home. And I could never forget that beating that I took, because I, unfortunately, I was very bored. We don't have TVs, radios, nothing. The books, super boring. There's no secular anything. Everything is policed. Everything is straight Gestapo, you know?
You're living in a Nazi state, propaganda included.
Basically.
Yeah.
And we would be downstairs a lot, and me and my neighbor, we were good friends. And the older brothers, unfortunately, I was a very easy target. Now I know why, because I'm a gentle, empathetic person, and I'm not mean by nature. I had to learn to become that way. I had to learn, not mean, but I had to learn boundaries, limitations.
You had to learn that you had a certain power.
Exactly. I don't have to be a people pleaser, and I don't have to take shit.
You know what the funny thing is about that religion, and I know how the Jewish people feel about the Nazis, okay? And for good reason. However, they hate them, yet they're becoming them.
They have internalized the trauma, just like I know it's not my place to speak about the Black community, but when you have, we could take it back thousands of years, the Spanish Inquisition, and all of the exiles that the Jewish nation have been through, it becomes internalized. And I think the Holocaust being pretty recent, our great-grandparents,
I knew a lot of
the ones that are
Holocaust
still
survivors.
alive,
Yeah.
still had the numbers on their hand.
Well, the funny thing about that is if they had the numbers, that means they were at Auschwitz, because Auschwitz is the only one that gave numbers. But very, very few people know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, Auschwitz is the only one that tattooed numbers.
Okay.
And I actually knew somebody who was at Auschwitz, and they recently passed about a year ago. And her husband was at Dachau. So, but it sounds like what you're describing to me with the manipulation and the propaganda and just the mind.
The separatism, the elitism, thinking like they can't mingle with other humans.
It's an interesting parallel. I don't know if you find it as interesting as I do. Nazis hated Jewish people. They don't even know why. And if you want to know why Nazis hated...
It wasn't only Jews. I'm sorry
Gypsies.
For
you're right. Gypsies and gays,
blacks.
all of it. So anybody that they were able to dehumanize. And if you want to know why that happened, watch the opening scene. You ever seen the movie Inglourious Bastards?
Hell yeah.
Okay. So That opening scene is that guy, Christoph Waltz, is probably the best actor I've ever seen in my life, because
Yes.
he made you hate him. But he explains very perfectly the hate towards a group of people by the squirrel and rat thing. And I'm not going to go through it all.
Genius analogy.
And it is, Quentin Tarantino obviously is the writer of that. But what a beautiful, not beautiful, but horrifying way to put the hate, because they don't even know why they hated them. They just hated them. But I did hear this story about especially the German Jews. The German Jews were given jobs because they were always seen as less than, and they were given jobs that nobody wanted. But German Jews who were industrious people found out a way to make those jobs successful, and they sort of took over the lower class jobs but made them high class jobs, and then the Germans hated them for it. Well, you gave them scraps, and they made an 8-course meal, and now you hate them because they made lemonade out of lemons. But when they bring that stuff to this country, especially he was ultra, you said he was ultra orthodox. Is that how you would classify him, your father?
Yes.
Okay. So being ultra orthodox, he's doing the same thing that I'm sure he spoke poorly about. I don't know of any person that's any Jewish person that's a Nazi sympathizer.
My dad is the biggest racist you'll ever meet, a homophobic, all that stuff. Even my friends weren't up to par to be allowed in my home.
That's crazy.
Yo, you have no idea. And imagine trying to explain that to my Russian immigrant friends who, were dirt poor, and then they'd come over and there would be, on the Sabbath, 3-4-course meals, and they would see so much food. And because they weren't what he wanted, or they weren't exactly what he expected. And meanwhile, I was 10 times worse off than they were. They were so much better than me. I was already, I don't like to use the word rebel, but I was already becoming a free thinker. Rewind to at the age of 3. When I looked around, because it's a big thing in the religious communities, they go to the Catskills in New York, because in Brooklyn, you're not going to have a good summer. So they have all these bungalow colonies that they go. My dad would get a job as a rabbi at a bungalow colony, so we'd get a free bungalow. And I remember looking around, and all these girls were, had their beautiful ruffle socks. And I'm 3, and I also want the pretty ruffle socks because I'm a girly girl, like ultra femme. And till this day, I go and I buy ruffly socks with the bows and the lace and the pearls, and because it's kind of like I'm doing what I couldn't do then.
Well, that's the Kellerman. So if anybody wants to get a picture of what that was like, so if anybody's seen Dirty Dancing, that's the Catskills Mountain, and that Kellerman place that they went to, they were Jewish retreats. That's what they were, and I know that very, very well. But it's funny because what I'm seeing here, and please tell me if I'm wrong. I'm opining. What I'm seeing here is this is such an illusion. It's such a frail illusion, because I've seen Hasidics who, and everybody knows Hasidics because of the way they look. They get busted for drugs. They get busted. They have cell phones. They have all the stuff that they're not supposed to have. Prostitution. It's an illusion. It's a magic trick. It's look over here. Look at what we're doing. Meanwhile, down here they're doing this. And the one thing I know about illusions is once you break the illusion and you see how the trick is done, you could see that other illusion 50 times and it's not going to mean anything to you. So you're telling me at 3 years old, you started to break the illusion.
The key component to any law enforcement officer being the best version of themselves is through education. Sherrie Allsup is a leader in providing that education to police agencies, preparing them for the all too frequent dealings with sexual assault victims.
You've seen Sherrie on episode 169 of the Suffering Podcast. She survived incest and almost daily sexual assault, so she comes from a place of experience and true understanding.
Sherrie has the intelligence, commitment, and compassion to open the eyes of those on the front lines, while providing the tools to effectively deal with a difficult situation. Sherrie's instruction comes from experience and multiple certifications.
Training with Sherrie will offer on-site training, customized schedules, specialized instruction, tailored from a victim's perspective.
You are going to hear Sherrie's heart-wrenching but inspiring survivor story. Learn proprietary trauma-informed training techniques, uncovered victim-centered interview methods while earning continuing education credits according to your state guidelines. To be the best, you must learn from the best. Let Sherrie Allsup guide you through the delicate cases of sexual assault from a victim's point of view.
Be a source of comfort to those victims affected by these traumatic experiences while producing a solid investigation and uncovering details that often go unnoticed.
To find out more or to contact Sherrie Allsup, go to sherrieallsup.com. That's SherrieAllsup.com.
I also had to, the night before, like, there's so many rules and commandments.
So 618, 13? I said it's 18,
Yeah.
okay.
So also another thing that I would have to do is every single morning, we believe that when we sleep, it's like we're dead. So when we wake up in the morning, we're considered that our hands are impure. So we have to make a blessing. And the night before, we bring a basin and we bring a cup filled with water. And then the next morning when we wake up, you're not even allowed to go run to pee. It doesn't matter how badly you have to go. The first thing you do is you wash the impurities off of your hands in a specific way. I don't know if I remember if it's the left first or the right first. And I'm glad I don't remember a lot of things, because it means that I'm healing and that my brain has fragmented, thank God, from all the craziness. But even at 3, I was, I wasn't having it. I was still pulling up my sleeves whenever I could get away with it. I was rolling down my socks already at 3. I was a very self-aware child, very self-aware. And
I imagine there was retribution for that as well.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I remember when we went to, because my father's family, thank God, his sister and his older brother, they live in Israel and they're very normal. And we went to one of the kids' weddings, and I had this, remember those like poofy sleeves? So of course mine had to be tailored that it covered my elbow. And my mom saw me like slowly pull it up, and she immediately looked over and glared at me. She said, "You pull that down now." Like already seeing that I want to fit in with the normal people and not be the extremist and look like a nerd and look,
Well,
because I didn't
the concept of normal to you.
right. What's normal? If
What-
you're normal, then the rest of us are crazy. If
Oh,
I'm
trust me, I'm
normal-
not normal. But the concept of normal is a so you're developing your own concept of normal. What's normal to you might not be normal to me, and vice
Right.
versa.
Right.
But you're developing a different sense of normalcy, because what your parents did, I believe that everybody has a justification for what they're doing. Nobody is inherently cruel. It's usually because of something that's a little bent in their brain that makes them think that this is normal. So what you grew up with, this is an amazing story for this reason, because what you were taught from the time you were born as being normal is very abnormal to you.
Very.
And that means to me that you always saw the holes in this.
I would even go so far as to say that when my little sister went into, we have something called primary. We have kindergarten and then primary and then first grade. So when she was in primary at the bus stop, I would fold down her socks for her. And then I would always remind her to make sure whenever there'd be fire drills, I would always, I'd get detention for it. I'd leave the classroom to go check to make sure my little sister was safely out and that she was safe, because I was definitely a parentified child to my my 4 younger siblings. So one of them not so much, because one of them is exactly like my dad, So me and him always butted heads, always. He was probably one of the cruelest to me. He would always say, "You're not a Jew. You don't deserve to be in our family. You bring shame upon us." He wouldn't allow me to come to his graduation.
Well, are women viewed as less than?
They
Or-
may say no, but absolutely we are. I mean, in the Hasidic community, the women don't drive. When we go to school, we're not learning really anything. Like, we learn the basics, reading, writing, and basic math. Most of the time when we're in school, we're learning Judaic studies. And these private schools, they take out huge government grants and say that they're schools. And meanwhile, the education that we receive is so pathetic.
Because what's a woman being trained for?
She's being trained to be a slave for her husband, to bed him, to procreate, to give him children, cook and clean, and keep them barefoot, dumb, and pregnant. And I know a lot of people aren't going to appreciate that. And it's not in every sect. I have to make that disclaimer because I don't want to upset an entire nation of people.
No. So we're
talking about the radical extremists.
Because you can say this about radical extreme. Look at Jonestown. I don't know if you know what Jonestown is, right? Jim Jones had the I forget the church of, I forget what it was, and he was doing the wrong thing, and so he moves everybody down to British Guyana and then has them drink. It's not Kool-Aid. It was like it was the off-brand Kool-Aid and laced with cyanide because they were coming to take everything and take his power away. So, and that was Christian, okay? And then you go and you look at Islam and you look at radical Islam. We all know what they did. So that's why I'm trying to say that we're not crapping on an entire race or entire religion. That's not what we're doing. We're taking this particular experience, Chasya's experience, and we're showing how this is very, very cult-like. What you're telling me is they separate you.
We don't eat the same foods. Mm-hmm. And it's also, if you think about it, it's a huge business because all these commandments, we have to get everything separately. We have to, and like there's kosher, but it wasn't kosher enough for my parents. They wanted us to take it to the extreme where it didn't just have that OU, which is like a little symbol, which stands for Orthodox Union. They would want it to have, it's called a hechsher, which means that it's additionally blessed by a rabbi. I couldn't,
just in case some non-blessing got on that food?
Because they were extreme and wanted to do everything above the other people, feeling like, they're taking they're more stringent and more extreme, and that they're building their way to heaven more. I wasn't allowed to have Twix because it had the D near the OU, which means, and the OUD already wasn't kosher enough. You couldn't bring that into my parents' house. And I mean, I wasn't allowed to have like the most basic snacks that could still be kosher because it didn't have a second kosher symbol on it.
Well, there's some hidden abuses inside those types of religion. And I know you experience some hidden abuses that nobody talks about, you never hear about, you never read about. And every once in a while, there'll be a story that pops out there. Why don't you tell us some of the hidden abuses inside that sect?
All right. First, let's talk about the fact that we have our own police force. I'm curious if you knew about Levi Kletzky's murder. The Jewish police found the murderer for that young Hasidic boy. He was...
Etan Pates?
No, there was this little boy named Levi Kletzky, and it was his first day walking home from camp. It was about 4 blocks, and he got lost. And we're always taught you can trust another Jew, and you can ask them for help. And this poor little boy went up to a guy. He looked Hasidic, and he said, "Can you show me how to get to this in the street?" And unfortunately, this guy, he put him in his car. He took him to a wedding. And when he came back, he saw that there were signs everywhere. They were looking for this boy. He poisoned the boy. He gave him a tuna fish sandwich. He put in Vicodin and a whole bunch of different things and knocked him out. He dismembered his body. And the Jewish police force found the murderer before the normal police did. They also have their own court system. And we're told or think we have to go to the Jewish courts. And let me tell you, to any religious Jewish woman, if you go to the Jewish courts and you're fighting over your children, I will guarantee you, it doesn't matter if your husband is a criminal, if he's hurting your children, if he's beating them, molesting them, anything, the rabbis will always side with the men. Always. I have never spoken to somebody who went to the Jewish courts as a female where they're on their knees begging and crying. Me, myself included, I didn't go to the courts, but I did go to a rabbi as my last. I was like, I'm just going to give it one last shot to see, like, would he help me?
You got to be able to trust somebody.
And he turned me away. And then I was like, you know what? Fuck you, motherfuckers. Like, I wanted that little last spark in me. I wanted to believe and hope so badly that he would turn to me and look at me and be like, I'm going to help you. And instead, he turned me away. And that's when I went public. I was like, okay, you want to sweep everything under the rug? You want to? That I'm not going to protect abuse anymore. I'm not going to protect any of this anymore. You break the silence and you break the cycle.
I had read enough about you and watched enough about you that you were sent away?
Yes. At 14 years old, I was already kicked out of the house.
Problem child.
Well, there was just no place for me to go. My parents were not going to send me to public school. And, you know, we always heard, like, in public school, and even my friends that went to public school, you would hear these horror stories that do not go on. And in my time in the private schools, it wouldn't fly because it's a sin to do those things. And, you know, we'd be pumped with fear, like, oh, they do drugs in public school. The kids are having sex at 12. And there's all sorts of horrible things going on in public school.
Part of that is true, but that's a different story. Part of that is true.
In my religious school, that was not happening. Nobody at 12 was doing that. But what happened was, because of my father's lineage, everything is about lineage. Actually, it's my mother's lineage. She comes from such a great dynasty that at first I was accepted just due to the amazing name of my family. But other parents took it upon themselves to say, why did you accept her? Do you know what she's like? She wears long skirts down to the ground. She does. And at that time, like, I was still following, for the most part, you know, towing the line, doing what I had to do. And of course, when I would go to New York and hang out with my friends, I would be a different person, you know? I'd leave my house, and in the wardrobe that I was expected to wear, like, I would not be allowed to leave my bedroom without a complete robe on. Like, even my brothers weren't allowed to see my elbows, weren't allowed to see my knees.
Did you have to wear something on your head as well?
Absolutely.
You had to wear
Absolutely.
something. Okay.
But I never minded that because I always loved hair extensions. I always loved the beauty industry. So that part I liked a lot.
Yeah.
You know, I loved to change up my look. One day be platinum blonde, one day be, you know, redhead, one day be black hair, one day. That part I didn't mind so much. But of course, once I had to, and I was forced to, I had that pathological demand avoidance. And then all of a sudden I didn't want to cover my hair anymore because all of a sudden it was, you must. And a Jewish widow, Jewish divorcee, and a Jewish married woman, all three have to cover their hair to show their status, that they're not a virgin.
Oh, so it all comes down to the ever elusive virginity.
Absolutely.
Now, women aren't supposed to sleep with anybody until they meet their husband. That's the way it is. But I'm sure it happens.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You'd be shocked. Like, even the girls with the long black skirts and the buttons up to here secretly are going in cars and, you know, doing it in the back seat.
They're kids. That's what kids do.
Yeah.
You know, you have raging hormones. Because whether anybody believes it or not, you growing up as a 14-year-old girl, you have the same hormones, you have the same drive, you have the same curiosities as every 14-year-old girl in the world.
I was actually very detached from my body and myself.
Oh, really?
So even though I dressed what they would consider slutty, or I dressed and looked a certain way, internally, I wasn't what they perceived me on the outside. And that has to do with childhood trauma and continuous trauma and
Well, you get beaten
in
down
my
enough.
life.
You get beaten down enough. You just, you know, like your father. Your father was told he was the king and believed it, and you're told you're not. And eventually you get told something enough,
Dude, like, if I said what when my mother called me instead of yes, I could get beat for that. Till this day, when my daughter calls me, I say yes immediately because it's a sign of respect. You're automatically saying yes. You're not saying what.
I was called the laziest white man alive. That's what I was called as a child. And I believed it. I believed I was lazy. And I've grown most of my adult life being the absolute opposite of lazy. And if anybody knows me, they know how hard I work on many different things in my life. So it's funny, but I still have that in the back of my head. And I'm sure you still have it in the back of your head as well, where maybe I am that person. But
Yeah, you internalize it when they say over and over and over again, you're this, you're this, you're this. Eventually, you do start to believe it. It's true.
as you move on and you're exhibiting all this behavior, you get sent away at 14. Did you eventually come back?
No.
You never went back home?
Oh, not right away. I mean, I didn't even want to go back home. Like when the big holidays would come up and everybody would go back, I wanted to stay.
Where were you?
I was in Memphis. I went to a boarding school in Memphis. And the South, oh boy, was that a culture shock. But that's why, like, I love Future and I love, like, I'm so influenced by that kind of music from the South because, you know, we were getting crunk and we were, you know, it was.
Oh, you were dabbling.
It was for the first time where, you know, boys, freedom to a certain extent. I'm still a minor, so they have to make sure that, you know, I'm safe. Watching movies. I mean, we did not watch movies. You know, I remember watching Titanic for the first time. I was sick and I was staying at this, in Memphis, the Jewish community is wonderful. They're very welcoming, you know? So shout out to all the Memphis people. But sadly, I was in a boarding house and the people from out of town that came weren't like the Southerners. And the concept of not liking somebody because they're pretty, that idea, I was never aware of it. My mother never told me I was beautiful. She never told me I was pretty, ever. I even confronted her about it when I got older, and I said, why didn't you ever tell me that I was pretty? And she said, because I didn't want it to be our main focus. And I said, well, that backfired because, I mean, I went to beauty school. I literally became a beautician and became a healer. I also do massage therapy. My whole livelihood became about making others beautiful, and I love fashion. Everything that
Because you know what it's like to feel unbeautiful. I don't even know if that's a word, but we're gonna make it a word.
Well, you know, till this day, I have a hard time accepting compliments because it's like your mother is the first person that teaches you how to be and how to feel. So, like, I make it a point to tell my daughter how perfect she is and how amazing she is and how proud I am of her and how proud she should be of herself. Forget me. And what an amazing person she is. And I, like, pump positive things in her head so that she knows she's the shit.
Eventually, you leave boarding school and you do go back, correct?
I leave boarding school. And what happened was at boarding school, I got bullied a lot. They even dedicated a whole underground yearbook to me. And I found out later from, you know, some of my friends that, like, a lot of the things that they put in the underground yearbook were aimed at me, which is so cruel.
You should actually feel honored that they took enough energy to do that.
You know, what you said is, I want to actually back up because somebody actually said something similar to me. He said, one day you will thank the people that did you so dirty because it will turn you into the powerful woman that you will become. You know, I remember when my ex-mother-in-law told me if I ever needed help, just reach out to her and she'd help me. That was a lie. And it's a trauma response. I don't like to ask people for help because I'm terrified of rejection. You know, I've been rejected my whole life and rejected by my parents, rejected by my family, rejected by the schools.
And guess what? You're still here.
I'm still here. And I will say this for the people that feel rejected. The best thing a therapist told me was about the mean comments is they haven't walked in your shoes. Chasya, you honor the inner child. You honor your inner child. They don't know anything about what you've been through. Because, I mean, when I was seeing like the most disgusting comments, like people were saying like, oh, she's wearing a sweater, or, why is she dressed like that? No one realized I was wearing my daughter's sweater.
We were talking about that. I don't think the cameras were on yet. Your soft white underbelly interview, I was telling you, that's how I met Clark. I met him by reading the comments, and not all the comments are positive, because there's just people who like to get under your skin. But the funny thing is do you understand that the people who give negative comments are more engaged in your story than the people who give the positive comments? So negative comments by default are good, especially when you're trying to get your message out, because those people they're the ones that are actually listening they're hanging on every word. They're looking for something to pull out so they can fire something off.
Oh, yes.
Like, they're the good ones. It's the Howard Stern maxim. So Howard Stern, when Howard Stern was Howard Stern, he said the statistic was the average Howard Stern person who likes Howard Stern listens for an hour a day. The average person that hates Howard Stern listens for 3. So think about that. So all those negative comments that came to you in that underground yearbook, you occupied so much space in their mind.
I lived rent-free in their heads.
And now you should feel very proud. You're like, you know what? I did that.
Let me just say that those girls all tried to come back around when I had my glow up and tried to apologize. And I was not gracious for their apologies. I didn't accept them. Went on a block party, because it's like, oh, now you want to be you don't want to be the dead fish going with the current. You want to swim against the current, because you see that, at 16, I got my first modeling gig. And I would be on photo shoot sets doing the makeup, doing the hair. And one time they asked me to fill in for somebody who didn't show up. And when I saw the pictures, because when I look in the mirror, I look at my reflection and I spit. And when I look at pictures, I'm like, there's no way that's me. There's no way that's me. And when I looked at these pictures of me, I was like, that's how I look? Like, for real?
Did you eventually go back and find yourself a nice Jewish man and get married? And did you eventually have to go that route, that traditional, ultra-Orthodox Jewish woman route?
I didn't want to be like I remember when I was in grade school, girls at 16 were being pulled out and getting married at 16.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to get married young, of course, but unfortunately I did. And because I met somebody, and
it was a choice. It wasn't arranged. It wasn't anything like that.
In a way it was a choice, but in a way I was also a sheep led to the slaughter, because when I met my ex-husband, he had his own home already. He's almost 10 years older than me. He was a place for me to escape to. Mm-hmm. And my mother would say to me, whenever I'd, come back, the neighbors asking, where are you? What am I supposed to say to them? You can't be living in a man's house, because that's completely against the law. You can't even be in the same room at a certain age with a man without having the door has to be open.
This podcast right here would, according to that sect of religion, would be improper and illegal. Me sitting in a room with a closed door with you alone, it would be illegal.
If we didn't have the cameras on us and all that stuff, yeah. And I believe that, I would babysit. I was the babysitter of the block. And I remember when the husband would come home and pay me, he would leave the front door open. And I'm a young girl. I was already babysitting 10 years old. I was changing diapers at 6, So we become a woman and we're considered responsible for, really responsible for all of the commandments at 12, and the men are 13. And the reason why the men get an extra year is because they believe men mature later than women.
I think that's true. I think that's very true.
It is true. It didn't pertain to me because at 3 already, I was being expected to do all of these things. And once you turn 12, the fastings start. All these things start. And it's not good to be considered an adult at 12, because you're still a freaking child at 12, especially nowadays and age. We're not developing as quickly as, my mom, all her,
It's an easier life.
Yeah, had the weight of the Holocaust on them from their ancestors, so they didn't dare step out of line out of respect. My mom said that when she'd sleep over at her cousin, the cousin's mom would be screaming in her sleep, so loudly screaming, because she had been through the war. So, you know, we would just constantly hear these stories, and we would be guilt tripped into, you know, things like, you know, how dare you like want to date somebody out of your culture? You know, if you would have been killed, you know, if you were in Germany, you would have been killed for being a Jew, and you're willingly going out and you're fraternizing with the non-Jews, you're a traitor.
Was your husband Jewish?
So he would never be approved ever by my parents, because he by law, if your mother is a Jew, by law, you are a Jew. Now, we didn't do his whole lineage and stuff like that, but his grandma was also a Jew, so we knew we couldn't go completely back, but his dad is a freaking Texan, 6'7", his name, I'm not gonna say his name, he's Irish, you know, I believe he told me he would go to church and everything. And so my ex went to public school. He couldn't read Hebrew, didn't know anything about our culture. He always had a thing for religious Jewish girls. He said it would be what's the word? Like, if he could get a Jewish girl to look at him, it would be a victory for him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's this weird thing that guys like rabbis' daughters, pastors' daughters, they say like we're very wild because we grow up so...
They say that about cops' kids, too.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they say that about cops. And there's some truth to that. So cops' kids do have a tendency, or they used to. I don't know if it's true anymore. They better not in my household. But they have a tendency to be a little bit more on the wild side because they can get away with a little bit more. They have a little bit more leeway than the average person, and people, it's not that way anymore. I doubt it's that way anymore. So you get into this marriage, and it's more of an escape. It's a place to go. And by the way, I know one of my very good friends escaped her household in much the same way by getting married when she was 17. So I understand the concept behind it. But once you got married, did you realize, hey, I might have made a mistake?
What happened is when my mom would use the neighbors as an excuse, like, because she cares so much about what other people think, I was living in sin because I was living with a man and we weren't married. So she began to pressure. Also, when he met my parents, you know, he had to prove, my ex doesn't like not being accepted, that his ego couldn't handle that. So he actually went to Israel. He went to a yeshiva. He learned, he did whatever he had to do to prove to my parents that he was worthy of me. And, which at the time, you know.
So it's endearing. Hey, look at this guy working.
It seems like, wow.
Look at this guy working hard to get my affection.
But it was just all love bombing. You know what I mean? It was just all love bombing. So when he gets back, my mom is like, you guys have to get married. You're living in sin. So I couldn't drag anything out. And I walked down that aisle. I didn't have a choice because I was living in sin. If I was given a choice, I would have most probably...
And you still have that victim's mentality where...
Like, I have to do what my mom is telling me I have to do because I'm so young. And I couldn't stand up for myself. So once we get married, first of all, we had a complete religious Jewish wedding. And then my ex, only his mom's a Jew. The rest of his family, completely not Jewish. All of, like, my daughter's cousins are not Jews.
By the way, I've been to enough Jewish weddings. I love...
Religious ones?
Yes. Not...
Like where the men and women are separated, like we can't even dance together.
We're talking
There's no father-daughter
reformed.
dance.
It's reformed. Yeah. And there's certain things I love about Jewish weddings. I love the stomping of the glass. May your marriage last as long as it takes to put that glass back together, which I think is very beautiful.
Oh, they told you that? It's actually to signify the destruction of the temple.
There's a couple, and that was the one that I like, so I'm going to steal that one.
Okay. I never heard that one.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
And some people actually get the shards of glass put into like acrylic like all shattered. So I always thought that was really cool. But I will tell you this, and Jewish people, you need to do better on this. The food at Jewish weddings, the ones that I've been to, is god awful. It's like, I love challah bread, okay? But beyond that, I was like, I'm not real big into sesame seed butter, and I'm not real big into that. Bad food. You go to like Italian weddings, they do trump everything. Italian weddings are pretty damn good. But yeah, that's the one problem I have with Jewish weddings.
I'm shocked because
I couldn't stand it.
wow. Well, I mean, there's so many rules and laws with kosher. So you're right. You can't mix meat and dairy. You can't. So you are very, very limited. But I will say this. My mother, she's such a good cook and baker. And that's like one of the really good things she passed on to me.
Yeah.
And I mean, the food that I make is bomb. So maybe it was a bad caterer.
Beautiful wedding. It was gorgeous. I mean, it was absolutely gorgeous. No cost spared. But I just wasn't crazy about the food.
Wow.
Now, are you still married?
Oh,
well, obviously, you said
no,
your ex.
No.
No.
First of all, when we get married, we have to go to a ritual bath for the first time. And we are considered impure, and we have to go to a ritual bath where it's so, I'm gonna like spare the audience because there's so many like rules. You can't have fake nails on, you can't have any scabs, you can't have cuticles, you have to be completely, the water has to be able to touch every single part of your body. And one of the lies that they say is if you have tattoos, you can't go and dip. And I have a tattoo, and now it's covered up because, you know, I'm not married anymore, and I branded myself with my ex because, you know, and he has a huge tattoo of our wedding monogram on his back. And but
and you also can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery,
which
right?
is BS, because I remember asking my teacher, but what about the Holocaust survivors? Aren't they buried in Jewish cemeteries?
So there's a great story.
It's a lie.
There's a great story. There was a Jewish mercenary who worked for Pancho Villa. This is a true story, but it was a Jewish mercenary that was from New York, worked for Pancho Villa during the Mexican-American wars down south. And there's a reporter doing a story on Pancho Villa, and he's talking to this guy, and they made a movie about it. So years later, he sees him in Brooklyn, and he had a tattoo right here. And when he sees him in this deli in Brooklyn, he lost his arm. And he goes, my mother's happy I lost my arm because at least I can get buried in a Jewish cemetery.
It's not true.
Yeah.
I was able to dip every single time I went. They say a lot of things that turn out to be not true.
No, that's what
Yeah.
we're here to. We're here to
I
dispel
went
some
in
myths.
with my fake nails, but let's add on to that. My mother worked in those ritual baths. So my mother she was able to always get me in first ahead of everybody else. But it was also for shame. She didn't want her coworkers to see me. She didn't want other people to see me. That was the real reason she was letting me go in first. So before your wedding, the night before you go into this ritual bath, it's because we cannot have sex on our periods. We're deemed impure when we are menstruating. And check this out. So I do the ritual bath. Totally traumatized me. It wasn't beautiful like they say it is. And I come out, and we have the Jewish wedding. It's completely separated, which means the men are on one side, women are on the other side. We celebrate. It's like two weddings happening. And turns out on my wedding night, I have my period.
Oh, no.
Which is like considered a really bad omen.
Well, was it wrong?
It's considered a really bad omen. Well, I guess, because we got divorced.
Yeah, so, I mean, they're like...
But periods shouldn't be bad omens. It's
No.
a sign of health. And because I have 2 autoimmune diseases, I didn't even think I could get pregnant, because sometimes for like a year I cannot get my period, and then sometimes for half a month I could have my period.
Ooh.
So, yeah, welcome to autoimmune deficiencies.
Ooh.
It's brutal. And so basically I couldn't have my wedding night. So I had to go through the whole process. It's called NIDA, of doing what you have to do is basically when you bleed, you can't touch each other. It's very, very strict, very stringent. You can't touch each other. You're not supposed to sleep in the same bed. You're supposed to put something down to always like remind you not to touch your husband. obviously, behind closed doors, me and my ex weren't keeping to it that strictly, but I know my mother was expecting me to. But basically, after the wedding, you have 7 days of partying where like you're being like watched. So like basically because it's kind of hard to explain, but the 7 days of partying, so you're not alone and you're being watched. And I think because the way we grew up with such purity culture, and we don't know anything about masturbation, we don't know anything about exploring our bodies, anything. When you have sex, it can be very traumatizing because you're not taught anything about it. So I remember a doctor saying to me, "Do you think once you learn to ride a bike, you can unlearn to ride a bike?" And that was the greatest parable he gave me because I was terrified and it felt like it was excruciating. And unfortunately, I had to be fucked up in order for us to do it because I could not clench and not immediately. Like anytime I'd be sitting at the table from 3 and up, my dad immediately would, you couldn't pick up your knees at the table. You always had to have your legs crossed. My dad would snap at me if, my skirt dare, he thought I was sitting in a way that was unbecoming and not modest. So even me, after being overseas, witnessing car bombs, 3 car bombs in one night, buses blowing up. I worked for an organization that picks up all the dead bodies after the suicide bombers go off. I witnessed, I would get to see all 16-year-olds who wear prosthetic bellies filled with explosives and walk into supermarkets and just blow themselves up. They would do it on donkeys, and it was a terrifying time. I mean, any time I got on a bus, I didn't know if I was going to get off that bus.
Yeah, that's a scary.
I was only 16 when I was.
That's a scary thing. But here's one thing I want to ask you. Would you still consider yourself Jewish after all this
Hell
stuff?
no. Like, people will say, well, you're a Jew. I say I'm a human. I am an American. And I happen to be born to parents that are Jewish, because being a Jew and being Jewish are 2 totally separate things.
Well,
My ex technically is a Jew, but he didn't know anything about our culture. He didn't know anything about anything.
I used to have this, one of my friends, when in my early 20s, she was Jewish. And we used to joke around, and I'd say, okay, I'm of Irish descent. That means my family's from Ireland. And this person is of German descent. That means they're German. This person's of Italian, so forth and so on. And I said, you're Jewish. Where are you from? And she without question, she used to go, I'm from Jewland. That's exactly what she used to say, because I was really good friends with her. And because you're technically the people without a land, but you have Israel.
Well, it's not ours as long as we don't have peace.
But you're of the Russian descent and German descent, and but people, the reason I say Jewish is because the Jewish people seem to identify primarily, they lead with their religion. So if you ask somebody, just a regular Christian, okay, they're not going to say, well, what are you? Well, I'm Christian. Well, nobody says that. They're like, oh, I'm of Irish descent, or I'm of Italian descent, or so forth and so on. But the Jewish people are very different with that. They will lead with their religion. It's a little odd because you got to come from somewhere, But here's the cool thing. How you grew up does not have to define how you live the rest of your life.
Amen.
All right? You had to be raised. Unfortunately, the pain that you went through has molded you into the person. And I've gotten a chance to speak to you a little bit. And I like the person that you are now.
Thank you.
But guess what? Here's the beautiful thing out of all of it. Had you not gone through all that ugliness as a child, probably would have never met, right? So there's some beauty in that, right? So why don't you tell our audience where they can find you?
Well, I have an Instagram page called Daughter Chasya, but there's a C there. I do not accept anybody that looks like a fake account or a troll account. I have I think at least 1,000 requests, but I'm very careful with that account because My ex is watching me. My ex is we're battling it in court. My ex has always been a stalker. I had no idea to what extent until when we went to court. Like, he knows what I'm doing at all times. And he even told me when we got divorced and I was living in my condo, he's like, I have someone in the neighborhood watching your every move.
Well, tell him if he's going to watch your episode, at least subscribe.
Anyways, I'm sure he's going to watch it.
We welcome it. We welcome it.
Let him.
Yeah.
Let him watch it. I have also a YouTube page, which it's daughter Chasya as well. What else?
And there is a GoFundMe page?
Yes, there's also a GoFundMe on my YouTube. There's a link, and also a daughter Chasya, because right now we're in court battling over my daughter right now.
And we're going to put a link to that in our show notes. All of those things.
And I'm pro se, and he has a fiance who seems to, it's definitely not her face that he's after, it's her pockets. She seems to be a very financially successful person.
I'm still thinking about those 50,000 shekels that your old man turned down. I was like, oh, man.
But he did it to be pious and devout, right?
Yeah.
But she's funding all of his legal fees, and what he doesn't realize is lawyers get paid whether they lose or not, and it's being dragged out. Luckily, we are right now custody 50-50. He's an absolute deadbeat. He hasn't paid child support in years. And he comes from a very well-to-do family. And I mean, I would never want it to be said about me as a man that I don't take care of mine, no matter what.
Anybody can be a father, but it takes a real man to be a dad.
Yeah.
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 So, Chasya, we're coming to the end of this thing here, and I always try to just quantify all this stuff that you went through with a final question. It is my belief that suffering is what propels you to the next level. You've gone through quite a bit being involved in this cult-like atmosphere, and it's hard to call something a cult.
No, it's a cult. When you all have to dress the same,
you
talk
can
the
call
same,
it a cult, but it has all the
we're
characteristics.
separatists.
It has all the characteristics of a cult.
I'm not allowed to talk to somebody who wasn't of our faith.
And I know it's taught you some stuff, because I think there's always a
Sure,
lesson in suffering. So can you tell me what your suffering of being involved in this cult has taught you?
This is going to shock you, but the one thing that I have taken from my religion is prayer. I don't know why, but every time I pray,
Because it's good for the
God
soul.
answers me. And he protects me. And Chasya actually means God's protection. And they say the name that we're given is the last form of prophecy in this world. And the one thing that I hold dear to me is prayer. And that's basically it. I take all the good morals and the good ethics that I was taught, but I'm going to wear what I want. I'm going to cuss. I mean, I wasn't even allowed to say the word pissed in my house. We're not even allowed to say Jesus. We would have to say Yashka. Like, why are we giving so much precedence to Jesus? I never understood that either. I wasn't allowed to be a human. And now, if I don't want to work one day and I want to sleep in bed and watch Boardwalk Empire, I'm going to do it. And nobody's going to tell me what to do. Like, I basically married my mother and my father with my ex. Like, he was both of them, sadly. Like, I didn't just, you know how they say you marry your parents? So now I'm, still in therapy. I'm very pro therapy. I'm all about trauma dumping. A lot of people think therapy, it's like, why would I want to tell a stranger my secrets? That stranger has to sit there and you get to trauma dump on them. And that's their job. And some people don't like the idea of the clock watching. And what you have to understand is they're not looking at the clock to get you out of there. It's because they have to make sure that the next client can come in. I remember getting insulted by things like that. But the one thing you have to be very careful in a therapist, for someone that's been in therapy since maybe 6th grade, you don't want a therapist who's going to leave you dissected, bleeding like a frog on a table. Like when
You have to bring about some healing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of therapists where you go in and you cry and you sob and you bring all these things out, and
And
they
they're
just leave you bleeding out.
All right, gotta go.
Yep.
Yeah,
Just
I know
like
those.
dissected like a frog on a table, just bleeding out. Those kind of therapists, and if you believe, because another thing I found out is a lot of therapists are on drugs too, because their job is so hard.
I've had enough therapists in here to know that while they try to help you get better, a lot of them have their own issues as well. And because
Yes.
but here's the thing, they're human.
They
They're
are.
human.
They
just
are.
just like, the people in your community that do wrong, they're human.
That's why I said when someone says, "What are you?" I say, "I'm a human being and I'm an American."
Yeah.
And if they want to dig deeper, we can dig deeper. But I can't just spit out, "Hey, I'm from the most extreme of," and like we didn't have to be that extreme. But when we moved from Brooklyn to Lakewood, my parents, something in them, they just completely flipped out and turned into, like in New York, they were just a little bit more. And, my grandparents lived in Borough Park, that's Hasidic world over there, I played with some of the biggest rabbis' children, and they were kinder to me. They were so much kinder to me than my own family was. And they were even more religious than I was.
At least a Hasidic will shake your hand. And it doesn't, did your father ever shake a Gentile's hand?
A man, yes, but
Like
a woman, no.
Okay.
Oh, my father always believed in holding doors open for women. He's always would tell us stories about like the people that were saved in the Holocaust, or the people that said good morning and treated every other human being like an equal. And we call it being a mensch,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if these are real stories or they just say it to indoctrinate us to be good and to be obedient and to.
Well, does it matter?
It doesn't.
If it makes you into a good person, it doesn't matter whether the stories are true or not.
I love South Park. I think South Park is a genius show. I think it's a brilliant show. And one of the greatest things that I took from South Park is, I think the episode is called The Passion of the Jew, and it's about, Mel Gibson's movie. And Kyle, he freaks out, he denounces his faith or whatever. And it boils down to the end. There's always a lesson in South Park. And the lesson is that we should not take all of these books that were written thousands of years ago literally. They're to teach us to take away the good and the lessons, but not to take it literally. Because back then, there was no electricity. There was nothing back then. So of course, if they're wandering around in a desert, they're most probably tripping balls, eating peyote, and they're seeing burning bushes. First of all, the Bible is written by men. I know, I've watched the Torah being written, but it's called a sofer, which it's a special thing.
Portions of the Bible were. The Bible was canonized at the Council of Nicaea in 422 AD, when Constantine flipped the Roman Empire into Christianity. But there were books that were written, because there's the Gospel of Mary, which they found at the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Gnostic Gospels they call. So there were things written by women. It's unfortunately men ruled the world back then, and they left the women out, which not the right thing to do.
Definitely. I mean, women aren't even allowed to sing in our
that's
culture.
crazy.
We can't
That's
sing.
crazy.
We literally are to be in the kitchen and to serve the men. Of course my ex would want to come into a culture like that.
It's not a bad.
He gets to be a king.
It's selling a good
and
product.
I have to be a submissive person.
Well, Chasya, I do appreciate you coming in here. I do appreciate you talking about
I
this.
appreciate you having me so much.
Because I could sit here and talk about just because I'm out of my curiosity about religion and how you grew up, because I enjoy it. I enjoy the history of it. I enjoy the dogma of it. So, but I do appreciate you coming here and opening up.
Awesome. If you ever want to do a part 2, I'll be completely down to come.
That sounds great to me. I'm in.
Awesome.
I'm in.
Thank you so much.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Suffering Podcast, The Suffering of Cults with Chasya. And let's think about all the stuff that we learned. Every religion has a sect that's radicalized. There are victim blamers and there are victim shamers. Beware of all the illusions. Look where the trick's being played. We all need protection, but most importantly, and you said this, and I don't even think you realize you said this, glow up, don't blow up. I love that. And that's going to do it for this episode. Don't forget to go to popple.com, put in the code TSP20 for a 20% discount on your digital business card. Follow us on all social media. That's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X. We're now on Rumble. And don't forget, always OnlyFans. And don't forget to follow me at Real Kevin Donaldson. And, of course, follow the Suffering Podcast. We're going to see you on the next episode.